The world of ancient Greece was a land of shadows and light where gods played with the lives of men. Among figures that walked the earth, none was as legendary as the mighty Hercules. He was the son of Zeus and a mortal queen, and his birth was marked by a great prophecy. But his path to glory was paved with blood and suffering, for the goddess Hera sought to destroy him from his very first breath. From strangling serpents in his cradle to facing the most terrifying beasts known to man, the hero would endure trials that would break any ordinary mortal. He was a man of immense strength, yet he was a prisoner of his destiny. Therefore, this is the complete story of a hero who fought for redemption and sought a place among the gods. It is a tale of labors and legends that echoes through time. The stories of Greek mythology are full of great heroes, but none faced such difficult challenges as Hercules. His story began long before he was ever called a hero. It began in the heart of a god. Zeus, the supreme god of Olympus and the lord of the sky, looked down upon the mortal world and fell in love again. His target was a beautiful young mortal named Alcmene. She was known not only for her stunning looks but also for her virtue and her loyalty to her husband. Alcmene was married to Amphitryon, the king of Tiryns and a noble warrior. At the time of Zeus's interest, Amphitryon had left his home and his wife to lead his army in a campaign against the enemies of the city of Thebes. Zeus took advantage of the king's absence to visit the queen. He knew that Alcmene was faithful and would never betray her husband. To achieve his desires, the god assumed the form of Amphitryon himself. He appeared at the palace gates looking exactly like the returning king. He spoke with the king's voice and carried the king's memories. Alcmene suspected nothing. She welcomed her husband back into her arms, and they spent a night together that lasted for 3 days. Zeus had ordered the sun god Helios to stay in his bed and commanded the stars to remain in the sky so that his time with Alcmene would be extended. Upon returning home from his actual military campaign, the real Amphitryon was confused by his wife's behavior. She did not seem surprised to see him and spoke of their time together the previous night. Amphitryon suspected his wife of infidelity. He was a proud man and his rage was great. Some stories say he ordered her to be burned at the stake for her supposed crimes. But as the flames were about to touch her, Zeus intervened. He sent a sudden rainstorm to douse the fire and revealed the truth to the king. He revealed that he was the father of one of the babies the queen was expecting. For Alcmene was now pregnant with twins. One child belonged to the god of gods and the other was the king's own child. Amphitryon felt honored to raise the child of Zeus, and he forgave his wife. However, the peace in their household was short-lived. Zeus could not help but brag about his future son. On the heights of Mount Olympus, he made a grand proclamation. He declared that on that very day a child would be born of the lineage of Perseus, and this child would become the high king of all those who lived around him. He meant for this child to be Hercules. But he had forgotten to account for his wife. The goddess Hera was the queen of the gods and the protector of marriage. She was furious at her husband's infidelity, and she decided to turn his own prophecy against him. Alcmene was indeed the granddaughter of the hero Perseus, which meant her child was entitled to the crown. However, her cousin named Nisip was also pregnant. Nisip's child was also a descendant of Perseus. Hera took action immediately. She descended to the mortal world and forced Eilithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to hasten the birth of Nisip's son. At the same time, Hera commanded the goddess to delay the birth of Alcmene's children. Eilithyia sat outside Alcmene's door with her legs crossed and her hands clenched, using magic to keep the babies from being born. Because of this divine interference, a weak and sickly cousin named Eurystheus was born first. Due to the premature birth of his cousin, Hercules lost his right to the crown of the glorious city of Mycenae. After a long and difficult labor, Alcmene finally gave birth to 2 boys. One was named Iphicles, the son of the king, and the other was named Alcides, who would later be known as Hercules. The baby Hercules was vigorous, and there was no doubt as to which of them was the son of the Lord of the universe. He was larger and stronger than any infant should be. But Hera's jealousy became uncontrollable. She could not kill a son of Zeus directly without risking the wrath of her husband, so she decided to use more subtle means. She sent 2 poisonous serpents to kill the babies while they were in their nursery. The serpents slithered through the palace and into the cradle where Hercules and his brother were sleeping. Alcmene awoke startled by the cry of Iphicles, who was terrified by the snakes. She rushed into the room with Amphitryon and his guards, expecting to find her children dead. Instead, they found baby Hercules laughing. He was sitting up in the cradle and he was strangling a snake in each hand. The powerful infant had crushed the life out of the monsters before they could even strike. Fearing further reprisals from the goddess Hera, Alcmene became terrified for her son's safety. She believed that if the child stayed with her, Hera would never stop trying to kill him. In a desperate attempt to save him, she took her son into the forest and abandoned him on a trail. She hoped that someone would find him and raise him as their own, far away from the palace. However, as fate would have it, 2 goddesses found the abandoned baby. They were Athena and Hera. Hera did not recognize the baby as the bastard son of her husband. Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom and a friend to heroes, knew exactly who the child was, but she kept the secret. The goddesses were impressed by the child's vigor and beauty. Athena suggested that Hera should show the child mercy. Hera felt a rare moment of pity and offered the baby her breast. She suckled him with divine milk, which was a food that would confer a power superior to almost all other demigods. It was this milk that gave Hercules his incredible invulnerability and his godlike strength. But the baby was already powerful. Hercules sucked on Hera's breast with such force that she cried out in pain. She pushed the baby away, and as she did, a gush of divine milk tinged the heavens. This event gave birth to the Milky Way, which we can still see in the night sky today. Athena then picked up the baby and recognized him as her brother. She told Hera that she would return him to his mother to be raised properly. When Hera eventually realized the mistake she had made in nursing her rival's child, she became even angrier. Her desire for revenge became an obsession that would last for the rest of Hercules' life. When the child was returned to his home, the famous seer Tiresias was called to the palace. He looked at the young Hercules and told the parents to celebrate. He said, "Let us celebrate the return of the child who will one day rid the world of all monsters and by his great deed secure a place in Olympus alongside his father." Hercules grew up and showed signs of becoming a great hero since his youth. He was trained by the best tutors in Greece. He learned how to wrestle, how to use a bow, and how to drive a chariot. But he also had a troubled soul. He possessed a temper that was as strong as his muscles. During a music lesson, his teacher Linus tried to correct his technique with the lyre. In a fit of rage, Hercules struck Linus with the instrument. Because of his great strength, the blow was fatal and the teacher died instantly. This was the first sign that the power of Hercules could be a curse as well as a gift. To punish him and to keep him away from trouble, Amphitryon sent him to the countryside to look after the cattle. It was there that he killed his first lion and began to gain a reputation as a protector of the people. Hercules eventually married a princess of Thebes named Megara. They had several children together, and for a time, it seemed that the hero might find peace. He was a dedicated father and a loyal husband. But Hera was watching. She did not want the bastard son of Zeus to live a happy life. She waited until his happiness was at its peak, and then she struck. Taking advantage of the hero's vulnerability, the goddess Hera planted the seed of madness in his head. Hercules began to lose his grip on reality. The world around him twisted and changed. He began to see the most terrible creatures, and he thought he was fighting great battles with monsters. But it was all hallucinations. In his mind, he was defending his family from giants and serpents. In reality, he was attacking his own home. When the fog of madness finally cleared and he recovered from that wild state, Hercules looked down. He had blood on his hands. His children and his wife Megara lay dead at his feet. He had killed the people he loved most in the world while believing he was saving them. The grief was overwhelming. Hercules was on the verge of taking his own life. He felt that there was no way to atone for such a horrific sin. He left his home and went into exile, wandering through distant lands in a state of great depression. He was eventually found by the hero Theseus, who was a great admirer of the son of Zeus. Theseus reached out his hand to raise him and convinced him that he must find a way to cleanse his soul rather than ending his life. Hercules decided to consult the oracle at Delphi. He wanted to know how he could ever be forgiven for what he had done. The oracle told him that he must go to the city of Tiryns and serve his cousin King Eurystheus. This was the same cousin who had stolen his birthright because of Hera's trickery. The oracle told him that he must perform whatever tasks the king set for him. If he completed these labors, he would be purified of his sins and he would even become immortal. Hercules was appalled. He considered Eurystheus to be an inferior man and a coward. He did not want to serve someone he did not respect. But the need to be cleansed of his sins was more important than his pride. He journeyed to the palace of his cousin and made himself available for service. Eurystheus was terrified of Hercules, and he feared that his powerful cousin would try to take his throne in the future. To prevent this, the king decided to set a series of seemingly impossible jobs. He hoped that these tasks would either keep Hercules away forever or result in his death. This was the beginning of the legendary 12 labors. It was a journey that would take Hercules to the ends of the earth and even to the depths of the underworld, as he sought to turn his divine curse into a legacy of glory. The night was silent in the ancient city of Thebes. Inside the palace of King Amphitryon, a heavy tension hung in the air. Queen Alcmene had recently given birth to 2 healthy boys. One was the son of a king, and the other was the son of the king of the gods. The divine child was named Alcides, though he would later be known to all of history as Hercules. But on the heights of Mount Olympus there was no joy. The goddess Hera watched the mortal world with eyes that burned like cold embers. Her heart was filled with a deep and unforgiving rage. Her husband Zeus had once again betrayed their marriage. He had visited the queen in the guise of her husband, and the result of that union was now resting in a cradle. Hera could not stand the existence of this child. To her, he was a living reminder of the infidelity of her husband. He was a stain on the honor of her marriage. She decided that the life of the child would be short. He would not grow to become a man. He would not fulfill the great prophecies of greatness that Zeus had spoken. The goddess of the heavens summoned 2 monstrous serpents from the depths of the earth. These were not ordinary snakes found in the fields. They were creatures of shadow and venom. Their scales were as black as the midnight sky, and their eyes glowed with a sickly green light. Hera commanded them to find the royal nursery. She told them to slide through the cracks of the palace doors and end the threat to her pride. The serpents obeyed her command without hesitation. They moved across the landscape like a silent river of death. They reached the walls of the city and slipped past the guards who saw nothing in the darkness. No sword could stop them and no wall could keep them out. They arrived at the heavy oak doors of the nursery where the 2 infants were sleeping. Inside the room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. The flicker of the flame cast long and distorted shadows against the stone walls. The 2 brothers slept in a shield that had been turned into a cradle. Iphicles, the mortal son, was restless in his sleep. He seemed to feel a chill in the air, as if the presence of evil was drawing near. But Alcides lay perfectly still. His small chest rose and fell with the rhythmic breathing of a deep and peaceful sleep. Outside the door, the serpents tasted the air with their forked tongues. They could smell the scent of innocence and mortality. With a slow and rhythmic motion, they pushed through the gap in the wood. They moved across the cold stone floor. The sound of their scales against the rock was like the rustling of dry leaves in an autumn wind. It was a sound that should have been heard by the nurse, but the palace was under a spell of silence. The snakes approached the bronze cradle. They rose up and peered over the edge of the shield. Their hoods expanded, and their fangs dripped with a poison so potent that a single drop could kill a full-grown man in seconds. They looked down at the two infants with hunger and malice. Iphicles woke first. He saw the swaying heads of the monsters. He saw the yellow eyes staring back at him from the dark. The baby let out a piercing cry of terror. His small body shook with a fear that no child should ever know. He tried to scramble away to the corner of the cradle, but there was nowhere to go. His screams echoed through the halls of the palace and broke the silence of the night. Queen Alcmene and King Amphitryon heard the cries of the child. They jumped from their beds and grabbed torches to light their way. They ran toward the nursery with hearts full of dread. They expected to find a tragedy beyond words. But inside the cradle something incredible was happening. Alcides had also woken up from his sleep. But he did not cry and he did not scream in fear. Instead he looked at the serpents with a curious and steady gaze. He reached out his tiny hands toward the attacking beasts. The snakes struck with the speed of a lightning bolt. They lunged forward to bite the neck of the divine child. But the baby was faster than the monsters. With a strength that defied the laws of nature, Alcides caught the snakes in mid-air. He grabbed one by the throat in his left hand, and he grabbed the other by the throat in his right hand. The monsters lashed their powerful bodies around his small arms. They tried to constrict him, and they tried to sink their fangs into his flesh. But the grip of the infant was like a vice made of cold iron. He squeezed with all his might. The serpents hissed and writhed in agony. The sound of breaking bones and crushing scales filled the quiet room. Alcides looked at the monsters with a calm and determined expression. It was as if he knew his own power even then. It was as if the blood of Zeus was already guiding his every action. The queen and the king burst into the room with the guards close behind them. The light of the torches revealed a scene that no one in the palace could believe. Iphicles was huddled at the end of the cradle weeping in terror. But Alcides was laughing with joy. He held the two limp bodies of the serpents in his tiny hands. The monsters were dead. Their once terrifying bodies were now nothing more than broken ribbons of flesh and bone. The baby tossed the dead snakes onto the floor as if they were nothing more than toys he had finished playing with. Amphitryon stared in silence. He looked at the child and realized that this was no ordinary boy born of man. He realized that the prophecy of the seer Tiresias was coming true. This was indeed the son of a god, and the future of the world was in his hands. The news of the miracle spread through the city like a wildfire. People began to talk about the child who had strangled death in his cradle. But Alcmene was afraid for her child. She knew that the anger of Hera would not end with a pair of snakes. She feared for the life of her son, and she knew she could not protect him from a goddess on her own. She decided to take a desperate gamble to save him. She took the baby into the deep woods outside of the city. She left him on a trail near a path that was frequently traveled by the gods. She hoped that someone divine would find him and protect him from the wrath of the Queen of Olympus. Fate is a strange and powerful force in the stories of the Greeks. It so happened that Athena and Hera were walking along that very path on that day. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, and she knew exactly who the baby was. She saw the strength in his limbs and the fire in his eyes. She turned to Hera and suggested that they help the abandoned child they had found. Hera did not recognize the infant at first. She did not know that she was looking at the very son of her husband she had tried to kill. She was moved by a rare moment of pity for a lost soul. She picked up the baby and held him to her breast. She offered him her divine milk to nourish him. It was a substance that conferred the power of the gods upon mortals who tasted it. The baby began to nurse with a hunger that was as great as his strength. He sucked with such incredible force that he caused the goddess a sharp and sudden pain. Hera cried out in surprise and pushed the child away from her. As she did, a gush of her divine milk sprayed across the dark sky. It left a trail of light that stretched across the heavens for all eternity. The Greeks believed that this was the true origin of the Milky Way. Even as an infant, Hercules had left his mark on the very universe. The milk of the goddess had made him even stronger than he was before. Athena smiled because her plan had worked. She picked up the baby and promised to return him to his mother. She told Alcmene that her son was destined for a glory that would never fade from the memory of man. She told her that the protection of the gods was now upon him because he had tasted the milk of Hera. However, the realization of what had happened soon reached the halls of Olympus. Hera was humiliated once again. She had nourished the very child she wanted to destroy. Her hatred turned into a dark obsession. She vowed that if she could not kill Hercules, then she would make his life a series of endless trials and suffering. She would take away his throne, and she would take away his happiness. She would make him suffer until he begged for the end of his days. The years passed, and Hercules grew with a speed and strength that was unnatural for any mortal. Even as a young boy, he was a giant among his peers in the city. He was educated by the best tutors in all of Greece. He learned the art of war and strategy from Amphitryon. He learned the art of wrestling from the clever Autolycus. He learned how to drive a chariot with the skill of Castor. But his spirit was wild and untamed like the mountains. He was prone to sudden fits of anger that were as powerful and destructive as a summer storm. One day his music teacher Linus tried to correct his technique on the lyre. In a moment of pure frustration, Hercules struck the teacher with the heavy instrument. The blow was so powerful that it killed the man instantly. It was the first time that the hero had blood on his hands. It would not be the last time that his strength caused a tragedy. His father Amphitryon was deeply worried by the boy's uncontrolled strength. He decided to send Hercules to the high mountains to live among the shepherds. He hoped that the hard life of the countryside would teach him the discipline he lacked. He hoped that the fresh air and the labor would calm his fiery soul. For many years Hercules lived on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron. He defended the herds from wolves and wild lions that prowled the rocks. He grew tall and muscular beyond any measure of a man. His skin became tanned by the sun, and his hands became calloused by the work of a shepherd. By the time he reached manhood, he was a figure of pure and absolute power. He stood head and shoulders above any other man in the land of Greece. His reputation began to spread far and wide beyond the mountains. He was no longer just a boy from the palace of Thebes. He was a hero in the making and a force of nature that the world was not yet ready to face. The destiny of Hercules was calling to him from the distance. The path of the 12 labors was still far in the future, but the signs were already there for those who could see them. The snakes in the cradle were only the beginning of his struggle against fate. The hero had taken his first breath in a world that wanted him dead. He had proven that he could survive the wrath of a goddess, and he had proven that he was born to conquer. As he looked out from the mountains toward the city of Thebes, he knew that his true journey was about to begin. The gods were watching him from above, and the monsters were waiting for him in the shadows. The name of Hercules would soon be known to every corner of the earth and beyond. He would be the one to bridge the gap between heaven and earth through his deeds. He would be the one to show the world what it truly meant to be a hero in the face of impossible odds. The story of his life would be written in blood and gold for all generations to remember. It would be a story of triumph and deep tragedy. But for now, the young hero simply stood in the light of the morning sun and prepared for whatever challenge the gods would send his way next. The air was clear and the world was wide before him. The son of Zeus was ready to claim his place in history and legend. He was ready to face the destiny that had been forged for him since the very moment of his birth in the palace. He walked down from the mountain with his club in his hand and the strength of the gods in his heart. The age of heroes was truly beginning. He would soon face kings and monsters and the very depths of the underworld itself. But first he would have to prove his worth in the land of his birth. His journey would take him to the court of a king who feared him and to a destiny that would change the world forever. Hercules had grown into the most formidable man in all of Greece. His strength was a gift from his father Zeus, but it was also a heavy burden to bear. As the hero reached adulthood, his physical prowess was unmatched by any mortal. He stood taller than the greatest warriors, and his muscles were as hard as the stones of the mountains. But his path was not one of simple glory. The hero was a man of intense passions and sudden rages. In his youth he was taught by the finest mentors in the land. Amphitryon, his mortal father, taught him how to drive a chariot with precision. Autolycus, the son of Hermes, taught him the art of wrestling. The great hero Eurytus taught him how to master the bow and arrow. Castor taught him how to fight in full armor and how to lead men in battle. But it was his music teacher Linus who first felt the danger of the hero's strength. Linus was the brother of the legendary Orpheus and a master of the lyre. One day Linus corrected Hercules for his lack of discipline and struck him during a lesson. The young hero lost his temper in a sudden flash of fury. He picked up the heavy lyre and struck his teacher across the head. The blow was so powerful that Linus died instantly. Hercules was brought before a judge for the murder of his teacher. He argued that he was merely defending himself against a blow. The hero was acquitted, but the event left a mark on his soul. Amphitryon feared the power of his son and sent him to the countryside. For years the hero lived among the cattle and the shepherds on the hills. This was where he truly began to understand his nature as a protector of the people. The hero's first great feat of strength happened on those very hills. A massive lion from Mount Cithaeron was terrorizing the local herds. Hercules hunted the beast for 50 days and nights. Finally he cornered the lion and slew it with his bare hands. He took the skin of the lion and wore it as a cloak, with the head serving as a helmet. While he was staying at the palace of King Thespius, he fathered many children. The king was so impressed by the hero that he wanted his daughters to have his bloodline. But the hero's destiny was calling him back to the cities of men. On his way back to his home in Thebes, he encountered the heralds of King Erginus. The king of the Minions had been demanding a heavy tribute from the city of Thebes. Every year, the people had to give up 100 cows as a sign of their submission. Hercules found this humiliation to be unbearable for a city of warriors. He captured the heralds and cut off their ears and noses. He tied their hands behind their backs and told them to take those to their king as tribute. This act of defiance led to a great war between Thebes and the Minions. Hercules led the army of Thebes into battle with the strength of a god. He crushed the Minion forces and killed King Erginus in single combat. The city of Thebes was finally free from the yoke of oppression. King Creon of Thebes was so grateful that he gave his eldest daughter Megara to the hero. Hercules and Megara were married in a grand ceremony that was celebrated by all. The hero felt a peace he had never known before. He loved his wife, and together they had 3 beautiful sons. The hero was a devoted father, and he found joy in his home and his family. He spent his days training his sons and enjoying the quiet life of a prince. But the goddess Hera was watching from her golden throne on Olympus. She saw the happiness of the bastard son of her husband, and her heart burned with hatred. The queen of the gods had not forgotten the insult of the hero's birth. She could not stand to see the son of Alcmene living in prosperity and peace. She decided that the hero must be destroyed not from the outside but from within. Hera looked down upon the city of thieves and began to weave a web of darkness. She summoned the spirit of madness known as Lyssa, the daughter of night. Lyssa was a terrifying being who had the power to cloud the minds of men and gods. Hera ordered the spirit to descend upon the house of Hercules. Even the spirit of madness was hesitant to strike such a noble and brave hero. Lyssa argued that the son of Zeus did not deserve such a horrific fate. But the rage of Hera was absolute, and she commanded the spirit to obey. As the hero was preparing a sacrifice to his father Zeus, the darkness arrived. A thick mist began to swirl around the eyes of the mighty Hercules. His heart began to pound with an unnatural rhythm, and his blood turned cold. The faces of his loved ones began to change before his very eyes. The goddess Hera planted the seed of a terrible hallucination in his mind. Hercules no longer saw his beautiful wife Megara standing before him. He no longer saw his 3 young sons playing at his feet. In his clouded mind they were transformed into monstrous creatures. He believed he was surrounded by the giants who had once threatened Olympus. He saw them as the spawn of the enemies of his father Zeus. A wild and primal rage took hold of his soul, and he reached for his weapons. His bow was drawn, and his arrows were notched with deadly intent. The hero began a hunt within the walls of his own home. He struck down the first child, believing he was slaying a young dragon. The second child tried to hide, but the hero found him and ended his life with a blow. Megara cried out in horror and tried to protect her remaining son. But the hero saw her only as a demon who was trying to deceive him. He did not hear the screams of his family or the pleas of his friends. He was trapped in a nightmare that was more real to him than the world itself. The hero slaughtered his family with the same strength he used to kill monsters. Blood stained the hearth and the floors of the palace where they had once laughed together. The madness was so deep that he even tried to kill his foster father Amphitryon. But the goddess Athena intervened to save the old man. She threw a massive stone at the hero's chest, which knocked him unconscious. Hercules fell into a deep and heavy sleep, surrounded by the ruins of his life. When the sun rose the next morning, the fog of madness finally began to lift. The hero opened his eyes and felt a terrible weight upon his chest. He looked around the room and saw the devastation he had wrought. The bodies of his children lay cold on the floor, and Megara was gone from this world. At first he could not understand what had happened or how the monsters had entered his home. But then the terrible truth began to settle in his mind. The blood on his hands was not the blood of monsters, but the blood of his own kin. The hero let out a cry of such agony that it was heard throughout the city of thieves. He was a man who had conquered every enemy, but he could not conquer his own mind. The realization of his crime broke the hero's spirit. He covered his head with his cloak and sat in the darkness for many days. He refused to eat or drink, and he would not speak to anyone who came to his door. Hercules wanted to end his own life to escape the guilt that was eating his soul. He felt that the earth itself should swallow him whole for what he had done. But his friend Theseus, the king of Athens, came to his side. Theseus had also known great suffering, and he refused to let the hero die in despair. He reached out his hand and told Hercules that he must live to find a way to atone. The hero knew that he could no longer stay in the city of thieves. The walls of the palace were a constant reminder of his horrific sin. He went into exile and wandered the land as a broken and haunted man. He sought out the wise and the holy to find a way to cleanse his soul. Finally, he made his way to the sacred mountain of Delphi. The oracle of Apollo was the only one who could tell him how to find peace. The hero stood before the Pythia and asked for the path to purification. The oracle spoke with the voice of the god and told him his fate. He was told that he must go to the city of Tiryns and serve his cousin King Eurystheus. The hero was told that he must perform whatever tasks the king set before him. Eurystheus was a man whom Hercules considered to be weak and inferior. The thought of serving such a king was a humiliation for the son of Zeus. But the oracle told him that this was the only way to wash away the blood on his hands. If he completed the tasks, he would not only be cleansed of his sins, he would also be granted immortality and a place among the gods of Olympus. The hero bowed his head and accepted the decree of the gods. He knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with impossible challenges. The goddess Hera was not finished with him, and she would surely influence the king. She wanted the tasks to be so difficult that the hero would perish in the attempt. But Hercules was no longer fighting for glory or for the praise of men. He was fighting for the redemption of his soul and the memory of his family. His journey would take him to the darkest corners of the world. He would face beasts that no other man could hope to defeat. The hero prepared himself to leave his past behind and enter the service of his cousin. He would become the laborer of the gods and the protector of all humanity. The blood on the hearth had set him on a path that would change history. He was no longer just a man of strength, but a man of destiny. The hero set out for the gates of Tiryns with the lion's skin on his back. His heart was heavy, but his will was as strong as iron. The first of the great labors was about to begin. Hercules would show the world that even a man broken by madness could rise again. His story would be told for thousands of years as a testament to the human spirit. The son of Zeus was ready to face the world and all the monsters within it. His journey would take him to the court of a king who feared him and to a destiny that would change the world forever. The stories of Greek mythology are filled with trials and suffering. But few men ever walked a path as dark and demanding as Hercules. The hero stood before the high stone throne of his cousin King Eurystheus. The king was a man of small spirit and a heart filled with constant fear. He looked upon the powerful son of Zeus with eyes of deep envy. The goddess Hera had been whispering in the king's ear. She wanted to see the hero broken and his name forgotten by history. Hercules was not there for glory or for gold. He was there to seek a path to wash the terrible blood from his hands. The oracle had spoken, and the command was absolute. He must serve the man he despised to save his own tortured soul. Eurystheus felt the power shift in the room as the hero bowed. The king knew he could never defeat Hercules in a fair battle. So he decided to use the world's most terrifying monsters to do it for him. The king leaned forward and spoke the words that would begin a legend. He commanded the hero to bring him the skin of the Nemean lion. This was no ordinary beast born of the natural world. Its golden fur was a fortress, and its claws were like swords of bronze. It was said that no arrow could pierce it, and no blade could cut its flesh. Hercules set out for the sun-scorched hills of Nemea with his club. The people of the valley lived in a state of constant terror. The lion had devoured their cattle and left their homes silent and empty. Hercules tracked the creature to a cave that had 2 dark entrances. He blocked one path with massive stones to trap the beast inside the mountain. As the lion emerged, the very earth seemed to tremble under its weight. The hero fired his arrows, but they bounced off the hide like harmless pebbles. His mighty sword bent like lead against the lion's thick ribs. Realizing his weapons were useless, Hercules cast them aside in the dirt. The demigod and the lion locked in a deadly and primordial embrace. It was a struggle of pure human strength against ancient monstrous fury. Hercules wrapped his massive arms around the lion's thick neck. He squeezed with the power of a god until the light left the monster's eyes. The first labor was complete, but the challenge was far from over. He needed the skin as proof for the king, but no knife could cut it. Using the lion's own razor-sharp claws, he finally flayed the hide. When he returned to the city wearing the lion's head as a helmet, the king fled. Eurystheus was so terrified that he hid inside a large bronze jar. He realized that the hero was even more dangerous than he had imagined. Through the metal walls of his jar, he shouted the order for the second labor. Hercules was to travel to the ancient and stinking swamps of Lerna. A multi-headed serpent known as the Hydra was poisoning the entire land. Its breath was a deadly mist, and its blood was like liquid fire. Hercules took his young nephew Iolaus to aid him in this dark quest. They found the beast hidden in the tall reeds of the pestilent marsh. Every time Hercules struck off a head, two more grew back in its place. The hero was being overwhelmed by the shifting mass of snapping necks. He called to Iolaus to bring a flaming torch from their campfire. As Hercules struck off a head, his nephew burned the stump with fire. The searing heat prevented the monster from regenerating its flesh. The central head was immortal, so Hercules buried it under a massive rock. He dipped his arrows in the Hydra's black and toxic blood. Now he possessed the most lethal weapon in the entire world. But the king refused to count this labor as a victory for the hero. He claimed that because Iolaus had helped, the task was not done alone. The frustration in Hercules grew, but he did not allow his anger to win. The third labor was a test of speed and great patience. He was told to capture and bring back the Cyrenian hind. This beautiful creature had horns of gold and hooves of shining brass. It was sacred to the goddess Artemis, and it could outrun the fastest wind. Hercules did not want to harm or kill the holy animal. He followed its tracks for an entire year across mountains and deep rivers. Finally, he caught it by a stream and slung it over his broad shoulders. On his way back to the city, he met the goddess Artemis herself. She was furious that her sacred hind had been taken from the wild. Hercules explained his situation with great humility and respect. He told her of the king's command and the weight of his own sins. The goddess saw the sincerity in his eyes and allowed him to pass. The king was shocked to see the golden deer standing in his court. He quickly sent the hero away to face the Erymanthian boar. This was a massive beast that left a trail of ruined crops and broken trees. Hercules chased the creature into the deep snow of the high peaks. The boar became exhausted by the biting cold and the heavy white drifts. The hero bound it in heavy chains and carried it back to the palace. Once again, the sight of the monster sent the king running for his jar. But the next task was designed to be a deep and lasting insult. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to clean the stables of King Augeas in one day. Thousands of cattle lived there, and the filth had piled up for 30 years. It was a job for a common slave, not for the glorious son of a god. Hercules did not complain or show the rage he felt in his heart. He went to the nearby rivers and used his strength to change their course. The rushing waters swept through the stables like a great divine broom. In a single day, the entire place was spotless and fresh. Yet the king again denied the labor, claiming it was the river that did the work. Hercules was then sent to the dark woods near Lake Stymphalus. The air was filled with man-eating birds that had bronze feathers. They shot their feathers like arrows, and their beaks could pierce iron armor. The goddess Athena saw her brother's struggle and came to his aid. She gave him bronze castanets made by the god of the forge. The loud and deafening clanging noise frightened the birds into the sky. Hercules shot them down one by one with his deadly poisoned arrows. The hero's fame was growing with every monster he defeated in the wild. But the king's malice was endless, and his fear was turning into hate. He sent Hercules across the blue sea to the island of Crete. A mad bull was ravaging the land, and the people were dying in the streets. Hercules wrestled the bull to the ground and tamed it with his bare hands. He rode the beast across the white waves back to the Greek mainland. The seventh labor was done, but the path grew darker and more violent. He had to travel to the distant and savage lands of Thrace. King Diom's kept a team of horses that were fed only on human flesh. They were wild and bloodthirsty creatures that knew nothing of peace. Hercules fought the king and his cruel army with incredible power. He fed the wicked king to his own horses to satisfy their hunger. The mares became gentle and followed the hero back to the city of Tiryns. The ninth labor took him to the legendary land of the Amazons. He was to bring back the golden belt of the warrior queen Hippolyta. The queen admired the hero's strength and agreed to give him the belt. But Hera disguised herself as a soldier and started a terrible rumor. She told the Amazons that Hercules was there to kidnap their leader. A bloody battle broke out in the palace and Hippolyta was killed. Hercules took the belt with a heavy heart and returned to his cousin. The 10th labor was the capture of the cattle of the giant Geryon. Geryon was a hideous creature with 3 bodies and a 2-headed dog. Hercules traveled to the very edge of the known and mapped world. He split the earth apart to create the straits that still bear his name. He killed the giant with a single arrow that pierced all 3 of his hearts. The long journey back was filled with trials and many thieves. But Hercules brought the red cattle to the high gates of the city. The king realized that even 10 labors would not be enough to kill him. He added 2 more tasks to ensure the hero would never return alive. Hercules was sent to find the secret golden apples of the Hesperides. No mortal man knew where the hidden garden was located. He sought the advice of the Titan Prometheus, whom he had set free. Prometheus told him to find Atlas the giant who held the sky. Atlas agreed to fetch the apples if Hercules would hold the heavy world. The weight of the heavens was almost too much even for the son of Zeus. When Atlas returned, he did not want to take back the heavy burden. Hercules used his quick wit to trick the Titan into taking the sky again. He escaped with the apples and finished the long 11th labor. The final task was the most terrifying thing a man could imagine. Hercules was commanded to descend into the silent realm of the dead. He was told to bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades. The dog guarded the gates of the underworld and kept souls inside. Hercules entered the land of shadows and spoke to the god of the dead. Hades said he could take the dog if he could master it without any weapons. The hero fought the beast with his bare hands as it bit at his throat. He choked the monster until it submitted to his divine will. When he dragged the hound of hell into the sunlight, the king surrendered. Eurystheus saw that no force on the earth could stop the son of Zeus. The hero had completed the impossible and his soul was finally clear. The 12 steps to redemption were finished, but his journey was not over. The world still held many challenges for the mighty hero, and his path to the stars was just beginning to unfold. Hercules had made himself available to serve his cousin King Eurystheus of Mycenae. The king was a man of small spirit and great fear. He lived in constant terror that his powerful cousin would one day reclaim the throne that had been stolen by the trickery of the goddess Hera. To prevent this, the king decided to send Hercules on a series of tasks that were designed to be his death sentence. These would become known as the 12 labors of Hercules. The first of these challenges was to hunt and kill a beast that had long haunted the valley of Nemea. This was no ordinary animal but a monstrous predator known as the Nemean lion. People whispered that the beast was the offspring of the monstrous Typhon and the evil Echidna. It was said that its hide was so thick and tough that no weapon made by human hands could ever pierce it. The lion had been terrorizing the herds of Argolis for years, and it had recently developed a taste for human flesh. The villagers lived in a state of constant dread as the golden beast would strike from the shadows and vanish back into the hills. Hercules set out for the forests of Nemea armed with his bow and arrows and his heavy club made from the wood of a wild olive tree. He traveled through the dense thickets and over the jagged rocks until he finally found the tracks of the creature. The trail led him to a cave on Mount Tretos which had two separate entrances. The clever hero knew that he must trap the beast if he was to have any chance of success. He blocked one of the entrances with a massive pile of stones and then waited near the other opening for the sun to set. As the twilight faded and the stars began to appear in the sky, a low and terrifying growl echoed from the depths of the earth. The Nemean lion emerged from the darkness, and its size was truly breathtaking. It stood taller than any horse, and its eyes glowed with a predatory fire that would have frozen the blood of any lesser man. But Hercules was the son of Zeus, and the blood of the gods flowed strong in his veins. He stood his ground and loosed an arrow with all his might. The arrow struck the lion directly in its shoulder, but to the hero's shock it simply bounced off the golden fur and fell harmlessly to the grass. It was as if he had fired at a wall of solid bronze. The lion roared in anger and turned its gaze toward the intruder. Hercules quickly fired another arrow and then another, but each one struck the impenetrable hide and shattered or fell away. Realizing that his bow was useless, the hero grabbed his massive club. As the lion leaped through the air with its claws extended, Hercules swung the club with a force that could have leveled a building. The wood struck the lion's head with a sound like a thunderclap, but the beast was only momentarily stunned. The club itself splintered into pieces from the impact, and the hero was left standing with only his bare hands. The lion recovered quickly and lunged again, but this time Hercules was ready. He threw his powerful arms around the creature's thick neck. This was a battle of pure strength that the world had never seen before. The man and the monster rolled across the rocky ground in a deadly embrace. The lion used its powerful hind legs to rake at the hero's chest and stomach, tearing his skin and spilling his blood. Hercules ignored the excruciating pain and tightened his grip. He squeezed the lion's throat with the strength of the heavens itself. He focused all his divine energy into his arms and refused to let go even as the beast's claws dug deep into his flesh. Slowly, the lion's struggles began to weaken. Its frantic gasping grew quiet and the fire in its eyes began to dim. With one final surge of strength, Hercules crushed the windpipe of the Nemean lion and the great beast fell still. The monster was dead and the first labor was complete. However, Hercules knew he needed to bring the skin back to the king as proof of his victory. He tried to use his hunting knife to skin the animal, but the blade would not even leave a scratch on the hide. He tried a sharp stone and then his sword, but nothing worked. It was then that a flash of divine wisdom came to him. He realized that only the lion's own weapons could pierce its skin. He took one of the sharp claws from the lion's paw and used it as a knife. The claw sliced through the hide as if it was soft butter. Hercules spent the next few hours carefully removing the skin, and then he draped it over his shoulders. The head of the lion became a helmet for the hero, and the rest of the skin formed a cloak that would provide him with nearly invulnerable armor for the rest of his life. When Hercules returned to the city of Mycenae wearing the skin of the beast, the sight was so terrifying that the guards fled from their posts. King Eurystheus was so overwhelmed with fear that he ran to his palace and hid inside a large bronze jar that had been buried in the floor. From the safety of his hiding place, the king shouted his orders through a messenger. He told Hercules that he was never allowed to enter the city walls again. From that day forward, the hero had to display the results of his labors outside the gates. The king was frustrated that Hercules had survived, but he was already planning a second task that he believed would surely end the hero's life. He ordered Hercules to travel to the region of Lerna to destroy a creature that was even more dangerous than the lion. The second labor was to kill the Lernaean Hydra. This was a monstrous water serpent that lived in the pestilent swamps near the coast. Like the lion, the Hydra was a child of Typhon and Echidna, and it had been raised by the goddess Hera specifically to be a challenge for Hercules. The creature was massive, with a body like a serpent and multiple heads that hissed with a venomous fury. Some said it had 9 heads, while others claimed there were dozens, and one of these heads was said to be immortal. Its breath was a lethal gas that could kill any living thing that came near, and its blood was a poison so potent that it could rot the very earth. Hercules knew he could not face this beast alone, so he called upon his faithful nephew Iolaus to serve as his charioteer and companion. The 2 men traveled to the marshes of Lerna, where the air was thick with the smell of decay and the ground was a treacherous maze of mud and stagnant water. They searched for hours until they found the deep cavern where the Hydra made its lair. To force the monster out into the open, Hercules fired a series of flaming arrows into the darkness of the cave. The tactic worked, and the Hydra emerged from the depths with its many heads writhing and snapping. The sight was enough to make the bravest soldier flee, but Hercules drew his sword and stepped forward to meet the beast. As the heads lunged at him, the hero began to strike with incredible speed. He chopped off one head and then another, but he was met with a terrifying surprise. For every head that he severed, 2 new ones sprouted from the bloody neck in a matter of seconds. The hero was being overwhelmed by the sheer number of heads. He was surrounded by the hissing monsters, and the air was filled with the toxic fumes of their breath. Even the goddess Hera decided to intervene to ensure the hero's defeat. She sent a giant crab from the swamp to attack Hercules and distract him from the serpent. The crab lunged forward and bit deep into the hero's heel, but Hercules simply crushed the shell of the creature under his foot and continued his fight. Hera would later place the crab in the heavens as the constellation of Cancer to honor its service. Hercules realized that he could not win the battle by force alone. He called out to Iolaus and told him to bring a burning torch from their campfire. A new strategy was formed in the heat of the battle. As Hercules used his sword to chop off a head, Iolaus would immediately step forward and use the flaming torch to sear the open wound. The intense heat cauterized the flesh and prevented the new heads from growing back. One by one, the heads of the Hydra were removed and burned until only the single immortal head remained. Hercules grabbed the writhing neck, and with one final blow he severed the final head from the body. Even though it was no longer attached to the monster, the head continued to hiss and snap with malice. Hercules took the immortal head and buried it deep in the earth beside the road, and he placed a massive boulder on top of it to ensure it would never rise again. Before he left the swamp, Hercules looked down at the dead body of the Hydra and saw the black blood oozing into the water. He remembered the stories of how lethal this poison was, and he realized it could be a powerful tool. He dipped the tips of his arrows into the toxic blood, and from that moment on his weapons carried a curse that could bring down even the strongest of foes. He and Iolaus returned to Mycenae in triumph, but King Eurystheus was once again displeased. The king claimed that the labor did not count because Hercules had received help from his nephew and had not completed the task alone. He refused to give the hero credit for the victory and insisted that another labor must be added to the list. Hercules was filled with a cold anger at this injustice, but he remained silent. He knew that his path to redemption would be long and difficult, and the trials of the lion and the Hydra were only the beginning of his legendary journey. He had faced the most terrifying monsters of the earth and survived, and his fame was beginning to spread across all of Greece. The people began to see him as a protector and a champion, but the king's jealousy only grew deeper as he prepared the next impossible task for the son of Zeus. King Eurystheus sat on his high throne and looked down at his cousin with a wicked smile. He had watched Hercules defeat the lion and the Hydra. He had seen him capture the golden hind and the terrifying boar. Every time the hero returned, the king felt a cold grip of fear in his heart. The people of Mycenae were shouting the name of Hercules in the streets, and their voices were getting louder every day. The king knew he could not defeat Hercules with a sword or a shield. He needed to find a way to break the spirit of the son of Zeus. He wanted to humiliate him and make him look like a common servant instead of a glorious warrior. This was why the king decided to assign the fifth labor. It was a task that was designed to be disgusting and beneath the dignity of any great hero. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to travel to the land of Elis. There lived a king named Augeas who was famous for his massive wealth and his incredible herds of cattle. King Augeas had thousands of animals, and they were kept in the largest stables in all of Greece. But there was a problem that had plagued the kingdom for 30 years. The stables had never been cleaned. For 3 decades the filth and the waste of thousands of cattle had piled up until the smell was enough to poison the air of the entire region. The mountains of manure were so high that they reached the very rooftops of the buildings. The fields were becoming barren because the waste was choking the life out of the soil. Eurystheus told Hercules that he must clean the entire stable in a single day. The king laughed because he believed this was an impossible task. He thought that Hercules would have to spend the rest of his life with a shovel in his hand, and he would be covered in filth and shame. Hercules understood the king's plan, but he did not show any anger. He traveled to Elis and stood before King Augeas. He did not tell the king that he was there because of the orders of Eurystheus. Instead, he made a bargain. Hercules promised to clean the stables in 1 day if the king would give him 1/10 of his fine cattle as a reward. Augeas looked at the hero and then at the massive piles of waste, and he laughed just as Eurystheus had laughed. He agreed to the deal because he was certain that no man could finish such a job in a lifetime, let alone a single day. The king's son Phileus was called to witness the agreement, and the stage was set for the labor to begin. Hercules did not pick up a shovel, and he did not start digging into the mountains of waste. He was a man of great strength, but he was also a man of great cunning. He walked away from the stables and climbed the nearby hills until he found the 2 great rivers called the Alpheus and the Peneus. With his divine strength, Hercules began to move massive boulders and dig deep trenches. He tore through the earth and changed the very course of the water. He directed the flow of both rivers so that they rushed down toward the stables of King Augeas. The water came roaring down like a flood, and it crashed through the stable doors with incredible force. The powerful current swept through every corner and washed away every bit of filth and waste that had accumulated over the decades. Within hours, the stables were scrubbed clean by the power of the nature that Hercules had mastered. When the sun began to set, the stables were pristine and the rivers were returned to their original beds. Hercules went to King Augeas to collect his reward, but the king was a man of greed and treachery. Augeas had learned that Hercules was performing the labor for Eurystheus, and he used this as an excuse to break his promise. He denied that he had ever agreed to pay the hero, and he ordered Hercules to leave his kingdom. Hercules was furious, but he remained calm in front of the king. He called upon the prince Phileus to testify to the truth of the deal. Phileus was an honorable man, and he stood against his father by saying that the hero was telling the truth. Enraged by his son's honesty, Augeas banished both Phileus and Hercules from the land. Hercules left the kingdom, but he swore that he would return 1 day to take his revenge and bring justice to the land of Elis. When Hercules returned to Mycenae, he expected the labor to be counted toward his 10 tasks. But Eurystheus was searching for any reason to make the hero's journey longer. The king claimed that the labor did not count because Hercules had used the power of the rivers instead of his own hands, and because he had asked for payment from Augeas. This meant that the hero would have to perform even more labors to satisfy the requirements of the gods. The king immediately gave him the 6th labor, which was to travel to the town of Stymphalos in Arcadia. The area was terrorized by a massive flock of birds that were unlike any other creatures on earth. They were known as the Stymphalian birds, and they were the pets of the god of war Ars. These birds were monsters with feathers of bronze and beaks of iron. They were man-eaters, and they would fly high into the air and drop their sharp metallic feathers like arrows on anyone who walked through the woods. The townspeople lived in constant fear because the birds reproduced quickly and they filled the skies with a deafening noise. The swamp where they lived was so thick and muddy that no man could walk through it without sinking, and the trees were so dense that the birds could hide easily from any hunter. Hercules arrived at the edge of the lake and looked out at the thousands of bronze birds. He realized that his bow and his club would not be enough to clear the sky of so many enemies at once. As he stood at the edge of the water, the goddess Athena appeared to him. She was the goddess of wisdom, and she always admired the cleverness that Hercules showed in his trials. She handed him a pair of bronze clappers that had been forged by the god Hephaestus in the fires of Mount Etna. These were not ordinary instruments. When Hercules climbed a nearby mountain and struck the clappers together, they let out a sound so loud and so shrill that it sounded like 1,000 thunderclaps echoing at once. The birds were terrified by the divine noise, and they erupted from the trees in a massive cloud of bronze. As they flew into the open sky, Hercules used his bow and his arrows that were dipped in the blood of the Hydra. He shot down many of the monsters with perfect aim, and the rest of the flock was so frightened that they flew away to a distant island and never returned to Greece. Hercules had once again proven that his mind was just as powerful as his muscles. But Eurystheus was not finished with his cousin. For the seventh labor, the hero was sent far away to the island of Crete. He was ordered to capture the Cretan bull, which was a beast of incredible power and fury. The bull had been sent by Poseidon, the god of the sea, to King Minos. The king was supposed to sacrifice the animal to the god, but he was so impressed by its beauty and strength that he kept it for himself. To punish the king, Poseidon made the bull go mad, and it began to destroy everything on the island. It knocked down walls and burned the fields with its hot breath and killed many men who tried to stop it. Hercules arrived in Crete and met with King Minos, who was more than happy to let the hero take the monster away. Hercules did not use weapons for this task. He wanted to show the world that he could subdue any creature with his bare hands. He tracked the bull to a coastal plain and faced the charging animal head-on. The bull lowered its massive horns and rushed at the hero, but Hercules stepped aside with the grace of a wrestler. He grabbed the bull by its horns and used his weight to pull its head toward the ground. The struggle lasted for a long time as the bull tried to toss the son of Zeus into the air, but the strength of the god was greater. Eventually, the bull realized it had met its master, and it became as gentle as a lamb. Hercules rode the animal across the sea and brought it back to the feet of Eurystheus. The king was so terrified of the animal that he ran and hid in his bronze jar once again. He ordered that the bull be set free, but it eventually made its way to the plains of Marathon, where it would later be dealt with by another hero named Theseus. Hercules was now more famous than ever, and his name was being told in every corner of the world. He had cleaned the filth of a king and cleared the skies of monsters and tamed the wild beasts of the islands. But the path to redemption was still long, and the trials were becoming more dangerous with every passing season. Eurystheus was desperate, and his next plan would take Hercules into the lands of the wild and cruel tribes of the north, where the very horses fed on human flesh. The hero prepared himself for the next challenge, knowing that his journey was far from over. He stood as a pillar of strength and a symbol of hope for all those who were oppressed by monsters and tyrants. His legend was being written in the dust of the stables and the feathers of the birds and the sweat of his brow. Hercules was ready for whatever the gods and the kings would throw at him next, because he knew that his ultimate goal was not just to survive, but to achieve a glory that would live forever in the stars. He turned his eyes toward the north and set out once more to face the darkness and prove that the light of a hero can never be extinguished. The air was cold and the road was long, but the son of Zeus did not hesitate for even a moment. He walked with the heavy tread of a man who knew his fate, and he welcomed the struggle that would make him immortal. He was Hercules, and his story was only just beginning to reach its greatest height. Hercules had already faced the most fearsome beasts of the Greek wilderness, and his fame was spreading like a wildfire across the lands, but King Athos was not satisfied. The king sat in his palace of Mini and felt the cold grip of fear in his heart. For every time the hero returned with a trophy, the people cheered louder and the king felt his own power slipping away. He needed a task that would take Hercules far from the safety of the Peloponnesian shores, a task that would lead him to the edge of the known world and into the path of gods and warriors who would not fall as easily as a beast. For his seventh labor, the king decided to send Hercules to the island of Crete. The king ordered him to capture and tame the fearsome bull of Crete. This was no ordinary animal. It was a creature of divine origin and terrible fury. The story of the bull began with King Minos, who ruled over the island of Crete. Minos had wanted to prove his right to the throne and asked the god Poseidon for a sign. The Lord of the Seas sent a magnificent white bull out of the waves with the condition that it be sacrificed in his honor. But the king was greedy and captivated by the animal's beauty, so he decided to keep it for his own herds and sacrificed a lesser bull in its place. The god was insulted, and his revenge was vicious. Poseidon caused the bull to go mad, and it began to breathe fire and stamp its hooves with the force of an earthquake. The bull ravaged the fields of Crete and destroyed the crops of the people, making the island a place of terror and death. Hercules set sail for Crete on a small ship, crossing the blue waters of the Mediterranean. When he arrived, King Minos was only too happy to let the son of Zeus try his luck against the monster. The king did not believe that even a hero as great as Hercules could survive such a battle without the help of an army. But Hercules did not want an army. He walked into the fields alone, searching for the beast. He found the bull near a ruined temple, and the creature let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. The bull charged with the speed of a thunderbolt, and Hercules stood his ground. He did not use his club or his arrows. He wanted to prove his strength against the divine fury of Poseidon. When the bull reached him, Hercules reached out and grabbed its massive horns. The ground beneath them cracked as the two forces of nature struggled for dominance. The bull lashed out and tried to gore the hero, but Hercules held on with arms like iron bands. He wrestled the beast to its knees, and after hours of grueling exertion, the bull finally yielded. The madness of Poseidon seemed to fade in the presence of such superior strength, and the animal became as gentle as a lamb. Hercules did not kill the creature, for his labor was to bring it back alive. He hoisted the massive bull onto his shoulders, or as some say, he rowed the beast across the sea as it swam through the waves, back to the mainland of Greece. When Hercules arrived at the gates of Mini, the sight was so terrifying that King Uthus again ran to his bronze barrel to hide in fear. The king was appalled that his cousin had not only survived, but had subjugated a creature of the gods. He ordered Hercules to release the bull, which wandered off toward the plains of Marathon, where it would later be dealt with by the hero Theseus. But the relief of the king was short-lived, for he quickly concocted a new labor that would require Hercules to travel even further to the east. The king's daughter, Admete, was a priestess who was known for her vanity and her desire for the finest treasures of the world. She had heard stories of the queen of the Amazons, who wore a belt of gold and jewels that had been given to her by her father, Ars, the god of war. This was the girdle of Queen Hippolyta, and Admete demanded it for herself. King Uthus saw this as a perfect opportunity to send Hercules into a war he could not win. He ordered the hero to travel to the land of the Amazons and bring back the girdle. This journey would take him to the distant shores of the Black Sea, to the city of Themyscira, where women ruled and men were not permitted to enter. Hercules knew that this would be no simple hunt. He gathered a group of brave heroes to accompany him, including his friend Telamon and the hero Theseus. They set sail on a ship and navigated the dangerous waters of the north, facing storms and unknown shores. As they drew closer to the land of the Amazons, the men grew nervous, for the women of that land were famous for their skill with the bow and their bravery in battle. When Hercules finally reached the harbor of Themyscira, he did not attack. He decided to try a diplomatic approach and waited on the beach for the queen to arrive. Hippolyta came down to the shore, riding a white horse and surrounded by her elite guard. She was a tall and powerful woman, and when she saw Hercules, she was impressed by his size and the stories of his great deeds. Hercules explained that he had been sent by his king to ask for her girdle as a gift for a princess. To the surprise of all, the queen was gracious. She respected the son of Zeus and felt that such a great hero deserved her kindness. She agreed to give him the belt without a fight and invited Hercules and his men to a great feast in the city. It seemed that for once, a labor would end in peace and friendship. But the goddess Hera was watching from the heights of Olympus, and she was enraged by this turn of events. She could not stand to see Hercules win a victory so easily. She disguised herself as one of the Amazon warriors and began to move through the crowds of women in the city. Hera whispered into their ears that Hercules had not come for the girdle, but that his true intent was to kidnap Queen Hippolyta and take her back to Greece as a slave. The seeds of doubt grew quickly among the warriors, and as Hercules was preparing to receive the gift, a great cry went up from the Amazon ranks. Believing their queen was in danger, the women grabbed their weapons and charged toward the beach where the Greek ship was anchored. The air was filled with the sound of arrows and the clash of bronze on bronze. Hercules, thinking that Hippolyta had betrayed him and led him into a trap, felt a familiar surge of rage in his chest. He did not wait to ask for explanations. He grabbed his sword and his club and began to fight back. The battle was long and bloody, for the Amazons fought with the strength of lions and would not retreat. In the chaos of the fighting, Hercules came face to face with Queen Hippolyta, who was trying to call off the attack. But the hero was blinded by the madness of battle and the belief of treachery. He struck down the queen, and as she lay dying, he realized his terrible mistake. Hippolyta had never meant to hurt him, but the deception of Hera had turned friends into enemies. With a heavy heart, Hercules took the girdle from the body of the fallen queen. He and his men fought their way back to the ship and managed to escape the shores of Themyscira. As they sailed away, Hercules looked back at the city and felt the weight of the tragedy. He had only wanted to complete his task, but once again the gods had used his strength to cause pain and loss. On the journey back to Myne, the hero encountered even more challenges. Near the city of Troy, he found the king of that city in a desperate situation. Poseidon had sent a sea monster to ravage the land, and the king was forced to sacrifice his daughter Hesione to the beast. Hercules saw the girl chained to a rock, and his heroic nature could not ignore her cries. He leapt into the mouth of the sea monster and fought it from the inside, killing the creature and saving the princess. But King Ladon was a man of broken promises and refused to give Hercules the reward they had agreed upon. The hero was forced to leave the city, but he swore that he would return one day to take his revenge. Hercules finally returned to Greece and presented the jeweled girdle to the sovereign King Athos and his spoiled daughter Admete. The king was amazed that Hercules had survived a war with the Amazons, and he began to realize that nothing on the surface of the earth could stop his cousin. Every time he sent Hercules to the ends of the world, the hero returned stronger and more famous than before. The ninth labor was complete, and Hercules had earned a brief moment of rest. But the hatred of Hera and the fear of the king would never truly fade. They would continue to find new ways to test his spirit and new lands for him to conquer in his never-ending quest for redemption and glory. Hercules was no longer just a man who fought monsters. He was becoming the protector of humanity who faced the schemes of the gods. The road ahead was still long, and the labors were becoming more difficult with every passing year. But Hercules stood ready to face whatever destiny had in store for him at the side of his father Zeus. King Eurystheus sat in his dark throne room and felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. He looked at the golden girdle of the Amazon queen and the trophies of the hero's past victories, and they offered him no comfort. For every time he sent his cousin into the jaws of death, the hero returned with more glory, and the people of Mycenae sang his name louder than ever before. The king knew that as long as Hercules walked upon the earth, his own power was nothing but a shadow. He had sent the hero to the ends of the world and to the deepest swamps, but now he decided on a task so cruel and so impossible that even the gods themselves would tremble. He would send Hercules where no living man was ever meant to go. He would send him into the kingdom of the dead, to the silent halls of Hades, to steal the very guardian of the underworld. This was to be the 12th and final labor. The king summoned Hercules, and his voice shook as he gave the order. He told the hero to travel to the dark gates of the abyss and bring back the legendary beast known as Cerberus. This was the three-headed dog that guarded the entrance to the afterlife, ensuring that no soul ever escaped and no living being ever entered. The creature was the offspring of the monstrous Typhon and the serpent mother Echidna, and its ferocity was whispered in every corner of Greece. It was a beast of nightmare with 3 savage heads that could see in all directions, and a tail that ended in the head of a venomous dragon. Eurystheus believed that even if Hercules found the entrance to the underworld, he would never return across the river of shadows. Hercules heard the command, and for the first time in his life he felt a chill of true dread. He was a man of the sun and the open sky, and the thought of descending into the eternal darkness of the pit was enough to make his heart heavy. But the hero knew that he could not refuse, for his path to redemption required him to face the ultimate fear. Before he began his journey, he knew that he could not simply march into the land of death with his club and bow. He needed a different kind of strength. He traveled to the city of Eleusis to seek the aid of the priests who guarded the secret mysteries of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. The hero underwent the sacred rituals of initiation, and he was purified of the blood and the sins of his past. The priests taught him how to enter the world of shadows without losing his mind, and how to speak to the silent spirits that dwelled in the gloom. With the blessing of the mysteries, Hercules felt a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a warrior, but a man who understood the cycle of life and death. He journeyed to the edge of the world, to a place called Taenarum, where a deep and jagged cavern led into the belly of the earth. As he stepped into the mouth of the cave, the light of the sun began to fade, and the air turned cold and stagnant. But Hercules was not alone in the darkness. The god Hermes, the messenger of the gods, appeared by his side. Hermes was the guide of souls, and it was his duty to lead the dead to their final resting place. Alongside him stood the goddess Athena, her eyes shining with a divine light that pierced the shadows. They were sent by Zeus to ensure that his son did not lose his way in the labyrinth of the abyss. Guided by the 2 immortals, Hercules descended deeper and deeper until he reached the banks of the river Styx. The water was black as ink and moved with a sluggish and mournful sound. On the shore stood the ancient boatman Charon, his eyes glowing like coals beneath his tattered hood. Charon refused to carry a living man across the water, for it was against the laws of the universe. He raised his heavy oar to drive the hero away, but Hercules was not in the mood for debate. He looked the boatman in the eyes and showed him the strength of a son of Zeus. Whether by intimidation or by the command of Hermes, Charon eventually yielded. Hercules stepped onto the fragile boat, and the wood groaned beneath his weight as they glided across the silent water. As they reached the other side, the hero saw the vast plains of Asphodel, where the countless shades of the dead flitted about like bats in the twilight. The ghosts of the fallen recognized the hero, and they fled in terror from the scent of life that he carried with him. But Hercules did not stop to look at the shadows. He marched toward the palace of Hades, and on his way he found 2 men chained to a rock of eternal forgetfulness. They were his friend Theseus, the king of Athens, and his companion Pirithous. They had tried to kidnap the queen of the underworld and had been punished for their arrogance. Hercules reached out and grabbed the hand of Theseus, and with a mighty heave he ripped the hero from the stone. But when he tried to save Pirithous, the earth began to shake, and the voice of the gods warned him to stop. Theseus was allowed to return to the world above, but his friend was fated to remain in the dark forever. Hercules continued his journey until he stood before the throne of Hades and his queen Persephone. The Lord of the Dead was a grim and formidable figure with a crown of iron and a face that held no emotion. Hercules bowed before the god and spoke with a voice that was both humble and strong. He explained that he was there by the order of King Eurystheus and that he sought permission to take Cerberus back to the surface. Hades listened in silence, and he was impressed by the hero's courage. No man had ever dared to ask for such a thing. The god agreed to the request, but he gave Hercules a condition that seemed impossible. He told the hero that he could take the dog, but only if he could master the beast using nothing but his bare hands. He was forbidden from using his club or his arrows or his famous lion-skin cloak for protection. Hercules accepted the challenge and went to find the beast. He found Cerberus at the very gates of the palace, and the sight was more terrible than any story had described. The dog was as large as a bull, and its 3 heads barked with a sound like crashing thunder. Snakes grew from its neck, and its dragon tail lashed back and forth with a deadly rhythm. Hercules threw aside his weapons and walked toward the monster. The dog lunged, and its 3 sets of jaws snapped at the hero's throat, but Hercules was faster. He wrapped his powerful arms around the central neck and squeezed with the strength that had once strangled the Nemean lion. The struggle was fierce, and the ground of the underworld cracked beneath their feet. The snakes on the dog's neck bit into the hero's flesh, and the dragon tail lashed at his legs, but Hercules did not let go. He held the beast in a deadly embrace until the monster began to gasp for air. The 3 heads drooped, and the fire in the dog's eyes began to fade. Realizing that it had met its master, the beast finally stopped fighting and whimpered in submission. Hercules had done the impossible. He had tamed the Hound of Hell with nothing but his own grit and power. With the permission of Hades, Hercules led the beast toward the world above. As they emerged from the cave at Taenarum and the sunlight hit the dog's skin for the first time, the creature began to howl in agony. It was not used to the brilliance of the sun, and it vomited a bitter green bile onto the earth. From that poison, the legendary plant known as aconite began to grow, and it would forever be a source of death for men. Hercules dragged the struggling monster through the countryside, and the people fled in terror as the son of Zeus walked the 3-headed nightmare toward the city of Mycenae. When Hercules reached the palace, he did not wait for an invitation. He marched into the court and presented the beast to King Eurystheus. The king saw the 3 snarling heads and the dragon tail, and he let out a scream of pure terror. He ran from his throne and dove into his bronze barrel, hiding like a coward while his court watched in silence. The king was broken. He realized that there was no mountain high enough and no pit deep enough to hold Hercules back. He realized that the hero was truly the favorite of the gods, and that his own reign of fear was over. Hercules looked at the shivering king and felt no anger, only a great sense of peace. He had completed the 12 labors, and he had paid the price for his sins. He led Cerberus back to the gates of the underworld and released the beast, where it returned to the side of Hades. The hero was finally a free man. He had conquered the beasts of the earth and the monsters of the sea, and finally he had conquered the darkness of death itself. But as he walked away from the palace of Mycenae, Hercules knew that his journey was not yet over. He had found redemption, but he had not yet found his place among the stars. His story was one of iron and blood, but it would soon become one of legend and divinity. The path to Olympus was open, and the mighty son of Zeus was ready to take his final steps toward the light. The adventures of the mighty Hercules were not always solitary journeys of penance and blood. There was a time when the son of Zeus joined a brotherhood of the greatest heroes ever known in the lands of Greece. This was the age of the Argonauts. A young prince named Jason had been tasked with an impossible quest by the wicked King Peleus. Jason was ordered to sail to the edge of the world to retrieve the legendary Golden Fleece. This fleece was the skin of a divine ram, and it was guarded by a dragon that never slept. Jason knew he could not succeed alone, so he sent word to every corner of the world. He called for the brave and the strong to join him on the ship named Argo. Hercules heard the call. Even though he was burdened by the tasks of King Eurus, the hero saw this as a chance for glory and to stand among equals. He arrived at the shores of Iolcos, and the people were stunned by his size and the lion skin that hung from his shoulders. Along with him came his young companion Hylas, who was a beautiful youth that Hercules had taken under his wing. The crew of the Argo was a collection of kings and demigods, but they all looked to Hercules as their anchor. When the ship Argo first set sail, the heroes were full of hope. The vessel was a wonder made of sacred oak from the forest of Dodona, and it could even speak with a human voice to give warnings to the crew. Hercules took his place at the oars, and his strength was so great that the ship moved faster than any other vessel in the world. The heroes first arrived at the island of Lemnos, where only women lived. These women had killed their husbands, and they wished for the heroes to stay with them forever. Jason and the others were tempted by the comforts of the island, and for a long time they forgot about their holy quest. It was Hercules who remained on the ship and grew frustrated with the delay. He shouted at his comrades and reminded them of their duty and the glory that awaited them. His voice was like thunder, and it shook the heroes from their dreams of peace. They returned to the ship and continued their journey into the unknown waters of the north. The journey led them next to the land of the Doliones. They were welcomed by King Cyzicus, who treated the Argonauts with great kindness. However, the land was plagued by the Geganies, which were monstrous giants with 6 arms that lived on the mountains. These creatures were the children of the earth, and they hated all men. While Jason and the other heroes were being feasted by the king, the giants attacked the ship in the harbor. They threw massive rocks into the water to block the path of the Argo and tried to crush the vessel. Hercules was the only hero who stayed behind to guard the ship. He did not wait for help. He drew his bow and began to fire his arrows at the giants on the hills. Each arrow found its mark, but the giants were many. Hercules then took his mighty club and charged the creatures. He fought like a storm, and the 6-armed monsters were no match for the son of Zeus. By the time Jason and the others arrived at the harbor, the ground was covered in the bodies of the giants. Hercules had saved the ship and the expedition, but fate had a cruel twist in store. After leaving the land of the Doliones, the ship was blown back to the same shore by a sudden storm in the night. The Argonauts and the Doliones did not recognize each other in the darkness, and a terrible battle began. Hercules led the charge, and many brave men fell before they realized they were killing their friends. King Cyzicus was killed in the confusion, and the heroes were filled with grief. They stayed to perform the funeral rites, but the joy of the voyage had faded. Hercules worked harder than anyone to push the ship forward, and his grief was turned into physical power. One day, while the heroes were competing to see who could row the longest, Hercules pulled his oar with such divine force that it snapped in two. The hero was frustrated, but they needed to find a place to land so he could carve a new oar from the trees of the forest. They landed at the coast of Mysia, and Hercules went into the woods to find a perfect pine tree. While Hercules was searching for wood, Hylas went to find fresh water for the evening meal. He found a beautiful spring called Peggy, which was hidden by the thick trees. The water was clear and cool, but beneath the surface lived the water nymphs. When the nymphs saw the beautiful Hylas, they were filled with a sudden and uncontrollable love. As the boy leaned down to fill his jar with water, the nymphs reached up and pulled him into the depths. Hylas cried out, but the sound was muffled by the water. Hercules heard the cry from a distance, and his heart was gripped by fear. He dropped the tree he had cut and ran toward the spring. He called out the name of Hylas again and again, but there was no answer. The hero was frantic, and he spent the entire night searching the dark forest. He was joined by another Argonaut named Polyphemus, but they found nothing but the empty water jar. The morning sun rose, and the wind was favorable for the ship to leave. The Argonauts did not see Hercules or Hylas on the shore. Jason was in a difficult position because he did not want to abandon the strongest of his men, but the crew was eager to catch the wind. A great argument broke out on the deck of the Argo. Some heroes wanted to wait, but others feared the delay would ruin the quest. Suddenly, the sea god Glaucus rose from the waves and spoke to the heroes. He told them that it was not the destiny of Hercules to reach the land of Colchis or to see the Golden Fleece. The son of Zeus had other labors to complete, and his path was separate from theirs. With heavy hearts, the Argonauts set sail and left Hercules behind in the woods of Mysia. Hercules continued to search for his lost friend until his voice was hoarse and his spirit was broken. He never found Hylas, and the loss remained a scar on his heart for the rest of his life. The trails of the Argonaut were over for Hercules, but his greatest challenges were still ahead. While Jason and his men faced the dragon of Colchis, the son of Zeus found himself called to a war of the gods. This was the Gigantomachy, which was the great war between the Olympian gods and the giants. These giants were not the same as the ones Hercules had fought on the journey of the Argo. They were the sons of Gaia who had been born to destroy the gods of Olympus and take their throne. The giants were massive and had serpents for feet, and their power was so great that they could throw entire mountains into the sky. A prophecy said that the gods could never defeat the giants unless they were assisted by a mortal hero. The gods of Olympus were in great danger as the giants piled the mountains on top of each other to reach the heavens. The goddess Hera and the god Zeus knew that there was only one man who could save them. Hercules was summoned to the plains of Phlegra where the battle was raging. The sky was filled with fire and the earth was shaking under the weight of the combatants. Hercules arrived with his bow and his club, and he did not hesitate to enter the fray. The giant Alcyoneus was the leader of the enemy, and he was immortal as long as he stood on his native soil. Hercules realized this and used his great strength to drag the giant away from his home. Once the monster was on foreign ground, Hercules struck him down with a single blow. The hero then joined his father Zeus and the goddess Athena in the thick of the fight. The giants were terrified by the man who fought with the strength of a god. One by one the monsters were defeated. Hercules shot them with his poisoned arrows, and the gods finished them with their divine weapons. The victory of the gods was secured by the hands of the mortal hero. This battle proved to everyone that Hercules was more than just a man of great muscle. He was the protector of the order of the universe and the savior of the gods themselves. Even the goddess Hera, who had spent her life trying to destroy the hero, had to acknowledge his importance. But even after the war with the giants, the life of Hercules did not become easy. He returned to the service of King Eurus to complete the final and most dangerous of his labors. He had traveled to the ends of the earth and fought in the heavens, but he still had to prove his worth in the eyes of the law. The paths he walked were long and filled with the ghosts of those he had lost, like the young Hylas and his own family. Every step he took brought him closer to the end of his mortal life and the beginning of his eternal glory. The hero knew that his time among men was limited, but his deeds would live forever in the songs of the poets and the memories of the people. The trails of the Argonaut and the War of the Giants were just chapters in the grand story of the mightiest hero to ever walk the earth. Hercules stood tall and looked toward the horizon, ready to face whatever the gods had planned for him next. The legendary hero Hercules had finally finished his long and grueling labors. He had faced the most terrifying monsters and performed tasks that no mortal man could ever dream of completing. With his debts to King Eurystheus paid and his soul cleansed of his past sins, the hero was now a free man. But even as he walked away from the service of his cousin, the shadow of his past continued to follow him. Hercules sought a life of peace and a chance to build a family that would not be destroyed by the madness of the gods. It was during this search for a new beginning that he arrived in the kingdom of Calydon. There he met the beautiful princess Deianira, the daughter of King Aeneas. Her beauty was known throughout all of Greece, and many men had sought her hand in marriage. Among her suitors was the river god Hercules, who could change his shape into many terrifying forms. But Hercules was not intimidated by a god of the water. He fought Hercules in a brutal wrestling match and eventually broke off one of the god's horns, forcing him to surrender. With the river god defeated, Hercules claimed Deianira as his bride. For a time it seemed that the hero might finally find the happiness that had always eluded him. He and Deianira set off on a journey to find a new home where they could live away from the constant interference of Olympus. Their journey took them to the banks of the river Evenus, which was swollen with heavy rains. The current was swift and dangerous, and the water moved with a violent force. Hercules could easily swim across the raging waters, but he was worried for his wife. It was then that they met the centaur Nessus. The centaur acted as a ferryman for travelers and offered to carry Deianira across the river on his back while Hercules swam alongside them. The hero agreed and paid the centaur a fee for his service. But as they reached the middle of the river, the animal nature of the centaur took control. He tried to gallop away with the princess, intending to steal her for himself. Deianira screamed for help as the centaur moved toward the far bank. Hercules was filled with a familiar and terrible rage. He reached for his bow and pulled an arrow from his quiver. This was no ordinary arrow, for it had been dipped in the black and poisonous blood of the Lernaean Hydra. With a steady hand, the son of Zeus fired the shot. The arrow flew through the air and pierced the centaur's chest with deadly precision. Nessus fell to the ground on the other side of the river, gasping for breath as the poison began to burn through his veins. As he lay dying, the centaur realized that he could still have his revenge. He whispered a final lie into the ear of the terrified princess. He told her to take some of his blood and keep it in a small vial. He claimed that it was a powerful love potion that would ensure Hercules would never love another woman. If she ever feared that her husband was losing interest in her, she should apply the blood to a garment and have him wear it. Deianira was young and fearful of losing the affection of the greatest hero in the world, so she believed the dying monster. She gathered the blood and hid it away in a secret place, never suspecting the treachery that the centaur had planned with his final breath. For many years Hercules and Deianira lived in peace, and they had several children together. The hero went on many other adventures, and his fame continued to grow across the lands of Greece. But as time passed, Deianira began to worry. She heard stories of her husband's many affairs and his interest in other women. Her heart was filled with a growing jealousy, and she began to fear for the future of her marriage. The crisis finally came when Hercules went to war against King Eurytus of Oechalia. The hero had a long history with this king, who had once promised him his daughter Iole in marriage, but had later refused to keep his word. Hercules conquered the city and killed the king, but he decided to take the princess Iole as his captive. When news reached Deianira that her husband was returning with a beautiful young woman, she was overcome with grief. She believed that Hercules intended to replace her with the younger princess, and that her time as his wife was coming to an end. It was in this moment of desperation that she remembered the gift of the centaur Nessus. She took the vial of blood that she had kept for so many years and prepared a beautiful white robe for her husband. She carefully smeared the blood on the inside of the fabric, thinking that she was creating a charm that would bring his heart back to her. She did not know that the blood of the centaur was actually a deadly poison mixed with the venom of the Hydra. The princess called for a messenger named Lycus and gave him the robe. She told him to deliver it to Hercules as a gift for his upcoming sacrifice to Zeus on Mount Cinium. She gave strict instructions that the robe should be kept in the dark and that no one but Hercules should wear it. Lycus traveled to the camp of the hero and presented him with the gift. Hercules was pleased to receive such a beautiful garment from his wife, and he immediately put it on as he prepared to honor his father. As the sun began to warm the fabric and the heat of the sacrificial fires rose, the poison began to take effect. The blood of the centaur reacted with the heat, and the venom of the Hydra began to seep into the hero's skin. At first Hercules felt a slight burning sensation, but it quickly turned into an agonizing pain that no man could endure. The hero tried to tear the robe from his body, but the fabric had fused to his flesh. Each time he pulled at the garment, it tore away large chunks of his own skin. The pain was so intense that Hercules let out a roar of agony that shook the very mountains. He realized that he had been betrayed, and his mind turned to the messenger Lycus who had brought him the gift. In a fit of blind rage, the hero grabbed the innocent messenger and threw him into the sea, where the gods turned the man into a stone. Hercules fell to the ground as the poison continued to eat away at his body. He knew that his mortal life was coming to an end and that no medicine could save him from the venom of the Hydra. He asked his friends to carry him to the top of Mount Oeta, where he could meet his end with dignity. When Deianira learned of what had happened, she was devastated. She realized that she had been tricked by the centaur and that she had accidentally killed the man she loved more than anything else in the world. Unable to live with the guilt of her actions, the princess took her own life, leaving behind a family in ruins. Meanwhile, on the mountain, Hercules prepared for his final moments. He gathered wood to build a massive funeral pyre and climbed onto it, ready to be consumed by the flames. He offered his famous bow and arrows to his friend Philoctetes, who was the only one with the courage to light the fire. As the flames began to rise, the sky turned dark, and the gods watched from Olympus. The mortal part of Hercules, which he had inherited from his mother Alcmene, was burned away by the sacred fire. But the divine part of his soul, which came from Zeus, remained untouched. Zeus looked down at his son and decided that he had suffered enough. He sent a chariot of fire and a team of immortal horses to descend from the clouds. The spirit of Hercules was lifted up from the pyre and taken to the halls of Olympus. As he arrived at the home of the gods, the hero was transformed into an immortal. Even Hera, who had spent his entire life trying to destroy him, finally relented. She saw that Hercules had proven his worth through his suffering and his incredible strength. She offered him her daughter Hebe, the goddess of youth, to be his wife in the afterlife. The two were married, and Hercules was finally able to rest in the company of the gods. He became the protector of mankind, and his story was told for thousands of years as a symbol of courage and endurance. The man who had been a slave to a king and a victim of a goddess's jealousy had finally become a god himself. The poisoned shroud had ended his mortal life, but it had also opened the path to his eternal glory. Hercules would forever be remembered as the greatest of all heroes, and his name would live on as long as men told the stories of the stars and the gods. This was the final chapter in the life of the son of Zeus, but his legacy was only beginning. The world was now safe from the monsters he had defeated, and the gods had a new champion to stand by their side. Hercules had completed his journey, and the hero was finally at peace. The poison of the Hydra was a weapon that Hercules had used against his enemies for many years, but now that very same venom was coursing through his own veins. The shirt of Nessus, which his wife Deianira had sent to him in a desperate attempt to regain his love, was not a gift of passion but a shroud of death. As the fabric touched his skin, the heat of the sun activated the toxic blood of the centaur. Hercules felt a sudden and sharp pain that no mortal or demigod should ever have to endure. It was as if 1,000 needles were piercing his flesh all at once, and the poison began to eat away at his very muscles. The mighty hero, who had defeated the Nemean lion and wrestled the three-headed dog of the underworld, was finally brought to his knees by a simple piece of clothing. The agony was so intense that Hercules tried to rip the shirt from his body, but the cloth had fused with his skin. Every time he pulled at the fabric, he tore away pieces of his own flesh. His cries of pain echoed through the mountains, and the trees seemed to tremble at the sound of his suffering. In his rage and desperation, Hercules grabbed the messenger Lycus, who had brought him the poisoned garment. Not knowing that Lycus was innocent and had merely acted on the orders of Deianira, the hero swung the messenger by his feet and hurled him into the sea. It was a tragic end for a man who had only sought to serve his master, But Hercules was no longer in his right mind. The pain of the hydra poison was driving him to the brink of madness. Realizing that his end was near and that no earthly medicine could save him, the son of Zeus began to plan his final departure from the world of the living. He knew that he could not die like a common man. He was the greatest hero the world had ever known, and his death needed to be as legendary as his life. Hercules traveled to the summit of Mount Oeta, a place that touched the heavens. This mountain was sacred, and it was here that the hero decided he would meet his fate. He called upon his son Hylas and instructed him to build a massive funeral pyre made of oak and wild olive wood. Hylas was filled with sorrow at the sight of his father's suffering, but he obeyed the command of the hero. As the pyre was constructed, Hercules laid his weary and broken body upon the wood. He rested his head on his club and spread his lion's skin over the timber. Even in his final moments, he looked like a king among men. However, a great problem arose. No one among his followers or his family had the courage to light the fire. They looked upon the hero with such reverence and love that they could not bring themselves to be the cause of his incineration. Hercules pleaded with them to end his torture, but they turned their eyes away in grief. The sun began to set, and the hero lay in the gathering darkness, waiting for a hand that would grant him the mercy of death. It was at this moment that a shepherd named Poeas, or in some accounts his son Philoctetes, happened to pass by the mountain. Seeing the great Hercules in such distress, the traveler felt a deep sense of compassion. Unlike the others, he understood that the fire was not an act of murder but an act of liberation. Hercules looked at the man and promised him a great reward if he would only strike the spark. With a heavy heart but a steady hand, the traveler set the wood ablaze. As the flames began to lick at the edges of the pyre, Hercules reached out and handed the man his legendary bow and his quiver of poisoned arrows. These weapons had saved Greece many times over, and now they would belong to the one who had the courage to free the son of Zeus. The fire grew larger and hotter, rising toward the clouds like a golden pillar. The people standing at the base of the mountain watched in awe as the flames consumed the mortal remains of the hero. But as the fire reached its peak, a strange phenomenon occurred. Instead of the smell of burning flesh, the air was filled with a divine fragrance. A great thunderclap shook the earth, and the sky opened up to reveal a brilliant light. Zeus, the lord of the universe, had been watching his son's final struggle with great pride and sorrow. He turned to the other gods on Olympus and declared that the mortal part of Hercules, which he had inherited from his mother Alcmene, would be burned away by the flames. But the divine part, the part that came from the king of the gods himself, would live forever. The flames on Mount Oeta acted as a final labor, a purification that stripped away everything that was human. As the mortal shell vanished into ash, the spirit of Hercules emerged, stronger and more radiant than ever before. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and the hero's longtime protector, descended from the heavens in a magnificent chariot pulled by 4 immortal horses. She reached out her hand and pulled her brother into the golden carriage. Together, they ascended through the clouds, leaving the smoking ruins of the pyre behind. The people on the ground fell to their knees, realizing they had witnessed the birth of a new god. Upon arriving at the gates of Olympus, the scene was one of celebration. The gods who had once feared or doubted the son of Zeus now stood in line to welcome him. Even the great god Poseidon and the messenger Hermes showed their respect. Hercules walked through the halls of the divine palace, no longer a tired traveler or a burdened servant, but an equal to the lords of the sky. However, there was still one obstacle that remained. The goddess Hera, whose jealousy had fueled so many of Hercules' trials, was waiting for him. For many years, she had sent monsters and madness to destroy him, but she now saw that her efforts had only made him the greatest of all heroes. In a final act of reconciliation, Zeus convinced his wife to set aside her anger. Hera looked at Hercules and saw the marks of his struggles, and she finally felt a sense of admiration for his persistence. To seal their peace, a sacred ceremony was performed. Hera symbolically adopted Hercules as her own son, and the old wounds of the past were finally healed. To show her favor, she gave him the hand of her daughter Hebe in marriage. Hebe was the goddess of youth and the cupbearer to the gods. Her beauty was eternal, and her heart was pure. By marrying the goddess of youth, Hercules was granted a place in the celestial realm where he would never again know the pain of age or the sting of death. Hercules and Hebe lived in a magnificent palace of gold and marble. They had 2 children, Alexios and Anicetus, whose names meant the warder of battle and the unconquerable. These children represented the peace that the hero had finally found after a lifetime of war. Hercules was no longer the man who had to clean stables or kill hydras to prove his worth. He was now the protector of the gates of Olympus, the god of strength who stood as a shield for both gods and men. He looked down upon the world of mortals with a kind eye, often intervening to help those who faced impossible odds. The story of the pyre on Mount Oeta became a symbol of hope for all of humanity. It taught the ancient Greeks that through suffering and hard work, one could transcend the limitations of the human condition. Hercules had been a man of many sins and many sorrows, but he had never given up. He had faced his demons, both literal and metaphorical, and had emerged victorious. His name became a prayer for the weak and a battle cry for the brave. Even the stars in the night sky were arranged to tell his story, as the constellation of Hercules remains to this day, a permanent reminder of the hero who climbed from the depths of despair to the heights of divinity. The legacy of Hercules did not end with his ascension. On earth, his sons and descendants, known as the Heraclidae, went on to found great dynasties and lead armies in the name of their father. Temples were built in his honor in every city, from the shores of Italy to the mountains of Asia. He was unique among the figures of mythology because he was worshipped both as a hero of the earth and as a god of the sky. People would offer sacrifices to him in the morning to ask for strength in their daily tasks, and they would pray to him at night for protection against the monsters that lurked in the dark. As the centuries passed, the details of his 12 labors and his many adventures were told and retold, but it was always the fire of Mount Oeta that served as the climax of his journey. It was the moment when the son of Zeus finally found the peace that had eluded him since the day he was born. The rage of Hera was gone, the blood of his family was washed away by the divine light, and the heavy club was finally set down. Hercules was finally home, standing at the right hand of his father, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most cruel of fates. The complete history of Hercules is a story of a man who became a myth who became a god, and a god who remains an eternal symbol of strength, courage, and the undying quest for immortality.